Yeah, I like the point you brought up too, Steve, about the about like there's just an overwhelming amount of sources and things available to us that it kind of reminds me of like the too many choices
Mhm.
paradox, like the consumer paralysis. Like you go to the store and there's just so many options that you don't know what to get. But it's more like we have so many sources available to us, and it's more so sifting through to find ones that are actually valuable sources. And you crediting the library at this university there with how
They're,
important.
well, and they are essential to the process, right? And especially now, as you see so many summary tools that are out there on the internet, uh, and like the deep search tool that's part of Gemini, right? That'll go out and do the searches for you. Okay, how are they doing it? So, for instance, being the same survey results, I had them in SurveyMonkey and I was going through, and I asked it to identify, what things were statistically significant. And that made my life easier because I didn't have to test every statistic, right? But when I went actually back and did the statistical calculations, they didn't always agree with what the AI tool told me, right? So I'm like, okay, uh, the AI tools, again, that they're all black boxes, kind of, right? So you have to really be able to step back and know to check, right? And go back to traditional tools to do that work. And I think that's going to be the biggest, step forward of how do we continue to get people to look at those tools and not just say, well, I can do it with AI, so I don't need to learn how. Similar to like 100 years ago when what you see is what you can get. HTML editors came out, right? When I first learned HTML, I did it in basically a Word document or a text file. And I always told people we should still teach that way first, because if they don't learn those tools, right, if they don't learn to actually code, then when they have a problem with the editors, they're not going to be able to clean stuff up. And I still find that today in our LMS, that there'll be an HTML line that I can just go in and clean out, but most of my peers couldn't because they never learned the basic coding of how to do that. Right. And so that's definitely, as we look at digital literacy, how much coding does have to be involved, right? You don't have to be an expert, and especially with AI, right? The problem is you have to know enough to know how to ask AI to help you with the code, right? I mean, it'll take a good coder and make you great and fast. It will not take somebody who's not a coder and turn them into a computer scientist.
Yeah, and I think it's a good segue too, just with the AI conversation. Because like there's some schools where I've gone to multiple times, and it's definitely the case that um, we're in this area where we have to keep up with the advancements of AI, and for teachers, professional development in any area where they're attending like PE days or their basic trainings at start of the year, like they're always new things that they need to be aware of. But like AI is moving so quickly that to keep them all up on the advancements is kind of difficult. And I would say that the schools that I've been to that we've done some trainings for, um, I do feel like the ones that have had us multiple times are at an advantage because then they're more aware of some of the recent things that have occurred. Whereas, some schools we maybe went to one time and they're still in kind of that introductory area. So with knowing that, with the AI advancements, do you see where there's like, regardless of where you're at, so if you're a school that's kind of still in that introductory phase, or if you're in, you've had a couple different trainings, you've been introduced to some tools. Do you think that there are practical steps that every school can take to make sure that teachers are prepared to integrate AI in some fashion?
Well, I think, not just AI, but in general, right? Any good training goes back to the original point. Make sure any new technology you're using is going to be a positive instructional or administrative tool, right? So figure out what is the concern you have, right? So one of the early things a lot of people have used, like the phraseology tools and the paraphrasing tools that are there in AI, with either like Magic School, Quillbot, or a couple that I can think of offhand that I've used in examples, to take something that is difficult maybe for a high school student who's got some reading disabilities and re-level the text for them, right? That's a very simple thing people can use and say, hey, I'm using this, and then maybe expand from it, right? And give people small things that they can be successful with and say, hey, yeah, this is very useful, and then move forward. And so just have access, because that's why I'm a little concerned about the districts that the teachers are saying, hey, well, they're not going to let us use AI tools. That's great, but the kids are still going to use them. The key is they're going to either use them under their own direction or your direction and guidance. And I would prefer that the educators provide direction and guidance, right? And kind of help them do what they need to do. And so I think the biggest step is give people the ability to be successful, provide that foundation for everybody. But then when you have your pioneers, give them the ability to push forward, right? But that doesn't mean, and I can think of one example. I was trying to get geography software into a library a long time ago. And the principal and all the central office people were pretty sick of me by that time with my hand out looking for things. So I went to one of the geography teachers he was retiring like in a year, right? He'd been there like 30 some years. He was the union grievance chair. So he was somebody, when he walked in the principal's office, he usually got attention. And I just went down and kind of told him, hey, these are the potential things we could do with this software. And then I just walked away, right? Next thing you know, the principal's coming to me going, Neil wants this geography software. What do we need to do to make it happen, right? It worked, right? So go to those people who are really good teachers, right? Because everybody would agree Neil was a great teacher. And it really worked out well. I take a lot of pride in the fact that he was going to retire and just move to Arizona. And because he got so excited about the things technology could do for his students, instead of that, he actually went down there and worked as a student teacher supervisor for Arizona State, right? So we didn't lose him to the profession. We got him excited about, hey, there are new things here. There's new potential. And he was helped to guide an entire new group of teachers into the profession. And so you got to provide for kind of everybody where they are. It's just like we ask teachers to differentiate for our students. Administrators and leaders have to differentiate for their teachers, right? What do you need to move you to the next step? And we often do that base, but then we don't go farther than that. So a few people figure it out on their own, but the majority lose a lot of potential because there isn't that systemic plan, right? In a perfect world, every single teacher would have an individual professional development plan, right? Just like Carlton Washburn is mentioned in Salman Khan's book, The One World Schoolhouse. But I actually worked in the high school district that the Winnetka students moved into. And that Winnetka plan was every student had an individual plan on what they were going to do. And they still do to this day. They started in the 30s. They still have it today. But that's what we should have for every student, theoretically, right? And you can't do that necessarily. But I do think if we look back at what the progressive educators wanted in the 1920s and 30s, the technology that exists now can really help us move to a lot of that work. So a lot of things that, John Dewey and Carlton Washburn and those folks talked about wasn't possible necessarily without massive amounts of time. Today, because of technology, we might be able to do more of those things. And so I think it's really time to go back and look at those folks and look at what were their thoughts and how can we potentially implement those to make sure that, nothing should be a one-shot PD kind of thing. Make sure our teachers are really getting long sustained support.
You look a little bit at school leadership. You've talked a little bit about educators too, but also let's touch a little bit on students or students and staff. How do you think we can get our educational institutions to kind of build up some of that digital resilience? And by that, what I mean, getting people to critically evaluate the information, the sources that it comes from, with the idea of helping to combat misinformation, disinformation, because I think even in this world of generative AI that we're in, it's becoming even more difficult to sometimes tell the real from the fake, the authentic from the created.
It definitely is. And again, one person's fake news is another person's solid fact, right? Because we live in this post-truth world where every fact can be argued, right? And so getting people to look at things and try to look in a non-biased perspective is, maybe it's more important just to identify, hey, what are the biases of whoever's providing this information, and then look at that and say, okay, now where do you want to come down sometimes? Because I'm not sure we can even 100% of the time identify this is actually the fact. One thing I always tell my graduate students, when they give you one statistic, one number, always be very wary, right? Because then the question is, okay, how does that relate to anything else? So if they don't give you something to relate it to, where to get to, it's practice. And we have to teach our students at all levels to actually make difficult decisions, right? And give them the opportunity to fail and learn from failure, right? We've sort of become overprotective of now, like, well, everybody has to get a good grade and we got to make sure there's no failure, because then when they get to college, especially if they go to a larger university that has a lot of, seminar classes that grade on curves, they're going to get hit in the face with failure in a way that never happened in their K-12 environment, right? And so you got to give people the opportunity to fail and learn from those mistakes and build that experience and take a look over time at, okay, where, what's a good source? What's a good source for me that works, right? And that's just a repetitive task. And at least now you have all of these materials, right? When I was a classroom teacher, there was talking about trying to bring the classroom, the real world into the classroom. Well, it's pouring in now in a digital wave. We just got to figure out how to take that data and use it effectively. So the more real world examples we can provide students and real problems they can solve, as opposed to just, the simple answers that are in the back of the textbook. And the answers for all those textbooks are online, right? So students can go find them. So you got to really work to develop good questions that require a little extra work.
I think some of it too comes down to educators needing to be able to model situations from their own real personal experience where either they've fallen victim to some of that, I fell for a trap and what I thought I shared turned out to be false, and then model then the steps that you took to try to correct your action, right? And to admit the vulnerability of it and like be human about it.
I remember a teacher with a master's degree coming in one day and saying, hey, I got this email from a soldier in Afghanistan, and he's got this money he wants to move to the US, but he needs my bank account to transfer it. And I'm like, have you not ever heard of the Nigerian princes? Well, yeah, but that's different. This is a soldier. And I'm like, oh, good grief. We might have to have some more training, right? But, phishing there's tons of stuff out there. And so you just have to, the more you can be honest and open with your students and walk them through, I think the better off you are.
Yeah, and that's something that we touched on a little bit earlier, but in given these the digital literacy areas, and thinking about there's some really good programs that cover all different aspects of digital citizenship, like some of the things you brought up, like identifying good sources for news, is the information correct, cross-checking that, combating misinformation, those type of things. And then another component, which you just mentioned, is like some of the cybersecurity issues and being aware of those.